Now let's discuss the structural functional perspective on the emergence of the state. Why do we live in the United States? Why do other citizens live in these things called the nation state? Thomas Hobbes is a political philosopher, and he offered the idea that the state emerged because we lived in a situation of war of all against all. Basically, Hobbes argued we lived in a system of chaos, where we had complete insecurity and a lack of trust. We lived in a world where somebody could come into our home, kill us, and take our stuff. We lived in constant fear. So, according to Hobbes, citizens surrendered some of their liberty for safety, security, trust, and justice. The model goes like this. First there was chaos, all against all. It was a scary world. We surrendered our liberty, created a state, and then we received safety. In classic structural functionalist framing, the idea is humans had a need. We had a need for safety. So what did we do? We created an institution called the state. The state created that safety for us. That's what institutions do. They meet human need. I want to compare and contrast the conflict and the structural functional perspective. So on the left-hand side, we have structural functionalism. It was a world of all against all, and this is about individuals, all against all, as the picture suggests. So those individuals got together and said, I don't want to live in a scary world where I could die at any moment. Let's create this institution called the state, and now we'll have a happy family behind a white picket fence. If there's a problem, I call the police solve the problem, put somebody in jail, everything's all good. We have safety, we have security, we have order, and the state gives that to us. Let's jump over to the right-hand side of the screen. The conflict perspective says the state was created in a situation of class warfare. It wasn't individual against individual. It was one group against another group. It was the haves versus the have-nots. The haves dominated the have-nots directly. The have-nots would rebel, so we need another picture here with the have-nots rebelling. And then the haves said, let's create an institution called the state that will serve our interests and it will protect us. And if you look at the pictures on the bottom half of the screen, you'll notice that you have police officers controlling poor people and people of color and dominating them with violence. Now, I want to just think about this for a moment. Let's imagine that these young men of color are making $30,000 a year and the police officers are making $60,000 a year. What you have is a have-not being dominated by a middle-class person, and notice that the person who's a millionaire, is nowhere in the picture. Because now you have the middle class dominating the poor and the people of color instead of the rich people directly. They have somebody else doing their dirty work for them, and the millionaire is sitting back and no one is attacking him, there's no violence being used against him, and now you have the have-nots saying, who's the problem? The police are the problem. They're directing their anger, frustration at the police, not at the rich people. How does structural functionalism look at the everyday practice of laws and lawmaking? Well, who will benefit from lawmaking? According to the structural functional perspective, all of us will. Because it's all about the greater good, right? So everyone benefits from lawmaking. I benefit from seatbelt laws. I benefit from laws that say that I have to heat my food at a certain temperature, and that people who kill animals or take care of lettuce or spinach have to go through certain security precautions. I have safer food. I have a safer home. I have a safer car. The laws benefit me. Who has access to lawmakers? Well, when we have a problem, all of us can get together and we can lobby our local politicians, we can lobby our state politicians, we can lobby our federal government politicians. What is the role of government? The role of government is to be a neutral referee or umpire. They listen to both sides of the story. Do you want a constitutional amendment saying that we must stand and salute the flag? You want a constitutional amendment saying that we don't need to stand and salute the flag? Let's listen to both sides, and we'll try to create a law that deals with this political issue, whatever political issue it might be. In the field of political science, this is sometimes referred to as pluralism, and the idea here again is interest groups are putting pressure on government. Now, I just want to point out, This perspective isn't saying, hey, look, as an individual, you have power in government. This is sociology. So this perspective says it's groups, interest groups that put pressure on government, and groups have power within politics. There's not a lot of sociological perspectives that say one man, one vote, the individual going to the voting booth is the power. No, that's not how sociologists see it. Either we see the power elite, or we see something like pluralism, where it's groups coming together and putting pressure on government, and the government being this neutral arbitrator, this referee figure, sort of figuring out what's best for everyone. When we talked about the conflict perspective, we also looked at these images. We have people who are in the federal government and go over to Goldman Sachs, or are in Goldman Sachs and they go over to the federal government. And a good critical thinking question for like a final exam would be, how does the conflict perspective see this? How does the functional perspective see this? And I want to offer you an answer to that. The functional perspective would say, it looks like the structure of our government has evolved. Washington has become very complicated, and Wall Street has become very complicated, so you have people who come into both organizations and they bring knowledge from both. So John Corazine, who was the CEO of Goldman Sachs, is going to bring knowledge about how Wall Street works into our government. Or he's going to bring information about how our government works to Goldman Sachs. And it's sort of this symbiotic relationship for Washington. It's a symbiotic relationship for Wall Street corporations. And it has evolved because there was a need for it to evolve. Similarly, if we look at something like pharmaceuticals, when I elect Paul Cook to go to, Congress and represent me, Paul Cook doesn't know anything about the pharmaceutical industry. So maybe it's useful for him to hire a staff member who used to work for a pharmaceutical industry, and he can say to that person, oh, well, how does the insurance system work with pharmaceuticals? How does the doctors and the pharmaceutical industry interface? How do these things work? So he hires lawyers that used to work for the pharmaceutical industry, or staff members, or former corporate employees that work for the pharmaceutical industry, and they work with him. Maybe they get elected to Congress too, and when we have a big healthcare bill that affects pharmaceuticals, those people come in, and they come in with good knowledge about the pharmaceutical industry. This is how the structural functional perspective would look at a chart like this. The conflict perspective completely interprets it differently and says, look, these people are, they have corporate greed, they get into the federal government, and they advocate for that corporate greed in the federal government. And this is why we have such expensive drugs. This is why our drugs don't work. This is why we're all unhealthy. It's because the pharmaceutical industry controls the government. I hope you see the contrast between the conflict and the functional perspectives, because this is going to be a final exam question on your test, and this is a goal of mine, for you to see the difference between these two perspectives. And maybe you'll be talking to a friend one day, and they'll say something, and you'll say, that's like the structural functional perspective, or maybe that's like the conflict perspective, and you can think about, well, what evidence would we need to know whether one perspective is right or one perspective is wrong? How could we scientifically look at these different interpretations of the world and figure out who's right and who's wrong, at least in that particular case?